Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Commander Conversations. In today's episode, we're going to be doing a 5-color Transformers deck. But before we get into that, please make sure that you've done all the YouTubey things, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment down below to let us know what you think, as well as hit that bell so you don't miss any future episodes of Commander Conversations or our Commander gameplay series, Just Another EDH Show. Thank you everybody, let's get into it. When Wizards announced that Transformers would be part of Brothers War, the community was again divided into people who felt that the sanctity of their game had been violated, those of us who grew up loving Transformers, and those of us who love Transformers and love the universe expanding because it gets us one step closer to a That's So Raven counterspell. Either way, the Transformers are here and they're not going anywhere, so let's transform and roll out the discussion about how to build these bots. Every single one of these Transformers is a legendary creature, so they can all be your commander. But what if we want to play with every Transformer? We'd obviously be looking at a WUBRG commander, and unfortunately there aren't any that are directly on theme. That being said, we have a ton of cool options like Sisay, Weatherlight Captain, so that we have something to tutor specific bots sitting directly in our command zone, Morphon the Boundless or Joda Archmage to make them cost WUBRG less than they already would. Or, we can lean into the legendary theme with the more recent version of Joda in the hope that casting Transformers will cascade us into other free Transformers. But I think the best option to command these bots is the Prismatic Bridge, both for its ability to cheat out cards and the fact that it's the closest thing we have to being an on-theme commander. Since, if you'll remember in Beast Wars, it was pretty common that Transformers would just randomly fall out of the sky and then they were just kinda there, without much of an explanation. Similar to how they're going to show up on the battlefield with the bridge as our commander. Now that we've got our commander, let's take a look at the Transformers as a whole and what they do. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to upset some people. I'm big on the original season and the original cartoon movie, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop Flame War and not Wheeljack from the rotation. Now that we've gone down from 15 to 13, let's look at the remaining Transformers and break them down into two categories: attackers and support. For attackers, we've got Optimus Prime, who in typical fashion has an ability that will assist other bots in Bolster 1, or Converted, where he bolsters 2 and grants Trample. We're not going to spend any time talking about his other ability that unfortunately forces us to revisit some childhood traumas. Ultra Magnus is awesome since he's essentially a Transformers Winota from your hand who has Ward and grants Indestructible when converted. In this deck, he's going to be fantastic since there's always the chance we draw into one of the cards we'd like to see being cast with the bridge. There's Prowl, who every time he attacks, exiles up to one other target tapped creature or vehicle that can be cast by its owner that's going to net as a card draw, as well as benefiting off of other creatures entering the battlefield when it's converted. We've got Blitzwing, who incentivizes attacks through his ability to essentially make an opponent lose the life they've already lost that turn a second time, while also being able to give himself flying or indestructible through his converted ability. Then, with one of the most flavorful abilities that I've ever seen on a card, Starscream in typical fashion is going to promote fighting with an ability that allows us to mess with who the Monarch is through both his robot and converted form. RC doesn't necessarily scream attacker when you look at her, but with the amount of counters we're playing with and the fact that she has first strike, we're going to be turning her sideways often while also trying to benefit off her ability to ping with the activated ability. Jetfire has an interesting ability to make himself into a flying 6/7, and we can reliably see him getting bigger with our counter sub package since we aren't planning to do a whole lot of casting with this deck. Megatron makes it so that your opponents can't cast spells during combat, and since combat is one of the most important parts of this deck, he offers some pretty valuable protection. He also has a pretty interesting converted ability, but we're not going to be relying on that one too much outside of the dire situation since we are not running an artifact recursion strategy outside of Ratchet. Speaking of Ratchet, he's kind of forced into being an attacker, since he's the only way we have to really gain life in this deck, and we need that to trigger his ability and return a creature with CMC equal to the damage dealt to the battlefield. 2 isn't much, but as I've mentioned, this is going to be a +1 counter sub-theme, and that 2 is going to get a lot bigger fast. I've played a game where Ratchet had the option of returning any artifact to the battlefield that I had in my graveyard, so don't overlook it. Finally, the best attacking transformer in our deck, Cyclonus, who, if we can get his converted ability to go off, is going to grant us a second beginning phase, which means we get to have a second prismatic bridge trigger in the same turn. Since most of the creatures we run in this deck are 4 CMC and up, this ability alone can help us save a ton of mana that we would need to cast other essential spells. Then after that, we've got our support transformers. These are the ones who more often than not are going to be sitting back watching the attacks happen. First, we've got Soundwave, and admittedly, his ability is going to be pretty tough for us to pull off, since outside of his own ability, we aren't creating any creature tokens in this deck. But it is Soundwave, and Soundwave has the distinction of canonically being the most superior transformer, so we're including him. If, however, we can cast him for more than meets the eye cost, and then cast one of the spells to meet his conditions, we'll have the appropriate creature tokens needed to begin having fun with his ability. Blaster is a support card in that we're using him to make sure our other transformers enter stronger, and so that we can abuse his modular ability to beef up the transformers we want to swing with. Think a more complicated Ozolith who should have also made tokens like Soundwave. Finally, in the support role, we have Goldbug. And at first glance, he looks terrible in this deck since all he does is protect humans. But this is a Transformers deck that we are trying to keep on theme, and there are a handful of human characters in the original cartoon, so I think it's appropriate that we have some humans in this deck to support our bots. Some of the humans that we can include are cards like Muzio, Visionary Architect, since it acts like a prismatic bridge that we've got at home that cares about the artifact cost. Paying 4 to cheat out that Ultra Magnus or Optimus Prime that you are otherwise going to be drawing into always feels good. Padim is going to give our Transformers hexproof, while ensuring that we get an extra card draw 9 out of 10 games we play, since it's not going to be often someone else has a more expensive artifact than we do. Rebecca might seem harmless on the surface, but in the game I was able to cast it with Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, Command Sphere, and a couple of different costing Transformers. My artifacts quickly had protection from everything with a CMC up to 7, so my Transformers were swinging freely thanks entirely to the protection that Rebecca offered. Blade Historian is an auto-include in most combat-based decks with an access to Boros colors, since he automatically grants your attacking creatures double strike, which synergizes with abilities like Blitzwings to help create more life loss through combat damage. Esper Sentinel's a great include because it's both a human and an artifact, and it's going to give us access to some card draw whenever our opponents cast their first non-creature spell during each turn. Sidri is a great include in a deck like this, since she can sit on the sidelines abusing her ability to put you in a position of having no blockers to having a field of them by turning converted Transformers back into creatures when it's not your turn, or by granting them lifelink to further buff Ratchet's ability and Death Touch to deal with any problem creature. We could also run Marionette Master, since in this deck she'll get a lot bigger than the 4/6 she can start out as, and she's going to drain people for a lot of damage. Or we can include Clamvus from the recent Warhammer Precon, since he'll make our modified Transformers even stronger. Artifacts are one of the most supported themes in all of Magic, and there are a ton of good options out there. But again, we want to limit it to just humans to try and make our deck look as much like the original cartoon as possible. If you're planning to cheat any off-theme creatures into the deck, I'd consider a few of the following. Steel Overseer can make your Transformers even bigger every turn, and it's an absolutely fantastic inclusion since a lot of the Transformers love counters, and he's technically a robot. Alibu is one of my favorite cards to include because it grants all of our other artifact creatures haste, while dealing damage equal to the number of tapped artifacts you control when you attack, and most importantly, allowing you to scry that same amount of cards. Pretty huge when you're scrying 10 plus in a prismatic bridge deck. Goliath Truck is a fantastic vehicle option since it's going to allow us to make use of a lot of our support creatures who'd otherwise be doing nothing but sitting back and watching the attacks. It also allows you to buff one of your other attacking creatures. You guessed it, more counters. So by now you've probably noticed, but in case you haven't, these Transformers love counters. And with the amount of counter support that we need, we should be running cards like Doubling Season, Broker's Ascendancy, Hardened Scales, and Branching Evolution, to name a few. We also have access to things like the Ozolith to protect all those counters we'll be creating should something happen to our creatures, while also benefiting by being an artifact at the same time. Most importantly in a deck like this, we want to make sure that we can manipulate the Prismatic Bridge so that we can guarantee what's going to be cast with its trigger. This is where cards like Scroll Rack and Sensei's Divining Top become auto-includes, while cards like Sylvan Library and Brainstorm are also going to allow us to manipulate the top of our deck. Cards like Commit also become protection spells in a deck like this, since we can respond to creatures being targeted by putting them in a spot where we can cast them again for free with the bridge. And the fact that we're in WUBRG means we can run each of the 10 fetch lands to mix up what's at the top of our deck as well. All of these cards are fantastic options for manipulating your top deck bridge trigger. Finally, the last thing we want to do is look at the ways we're going to protect our Transformers through cards like Darksteel Forge to give all of our Transformers indestructible, or cards like Wake the Past to bring them back after a well-timed board wipe. Decks are susceptible to a lot of things, and this one is no different though. We're scared of cards like Farewell, and we need to figure out ways to protect against them, since a well-timed exiling of your Transformers may as well end your game. That's why we rely on cards like Teferi's Protection, but again, no plan is ever perfect. Just ask Megatron. This deck is all about fun. It's about seeing how many of our favorite Transformers from when we were a kid we can have on the battlefield blocking dinosaurs and turning sideways at pirates. It's a deck you can reliably play everywhere since no one is going to be upset about getting run over by an army of Transformers, whether it's at an LGS or in your friend's garage. It's obviously not a deck that we want to build if we're looking to make high IQ combo plays or impress everybody watching us with our magic prowess. It's about turning Transformers sideways while complaining that we don't have a combiner ability. Hint hint. Wizards. Devastator perhaps? Like every deck, make it how you want. Impose your own level of self-restrictions that are appropriate for setting a fun atmosphere within your own local group's meta. Or, try and turn it into a complex puzzle Transformers combo machine. For me though, I really enjoyed the idea of building this deck to try and look like the show and movie I grew up loving and watching on repeat. At the end of the day, we're all playing this game to have fun, and so long as the entire tables have fun, then we've built the deck the right way. Thank you so much to everyone for coming by to discuss the new Transformers cards. How are you playing them, and did you toss them into a deck together, or are you running one Transformer specifically as your commander? We'd love to hear from everyone in the comments below. And before you go, please make sure you like the video, you're subscribed to our channel, and you hit the bell so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes of Commander Conversations or just another EDH show. Thanks everybody, until next time.